Hello, my name is Jason Benedict, and I'm thrilled to share a little from my chapter, The Business of Educating the Poor, in the recently released book, The Third Education Revolution. I'm really appreciative for this opportunity to share a phenomenal kingdom business and discipleship opportunity. It's not an exaggeration to say this is unprecedented. Let me begin by just sharing a formative experience that I had in the early 2000s. I was working in the African Sahel, doing some projects across a number of majority Muslim countries. In one of these countries, the Christian population was less than 0.5%. We were looking for ways to evangelize, disciple, and transform nations. And doing this research, we discovered that each year, the top schools by test scores, you see the test scores were published in the newspaper for every school across the city. And each year, the top test scores were the top three schools were the three Christian private schools in the capital city. Now, the word on the street was that if you wanted a quality education for your children, you should send them to a Christian school. But when we discovered this, we began to look, and we realized that the second largest city in the country didn't have a Christian school yet. So we decided to partner with a local missions organization to launch just such a school. To our delight, the local community beat a path to our door and clamored to enroll their children in the school. In this picture, you see the groundbreaking when we were getting ready to set the school up. When it opened, they absolutely beat a path to our door. Now, it's important to note that these were the prominent families of the city, whose children were likely to be tomorrow's influencers. It's also important to note that this school was financially stable from the beginning because of the willingness of these people to pay for quality education. The curriculum and atmosphere of the school were unapologetically Christian. So watching this process impressed on me that there was a much larger opportunity to disciple nations, and African nations in particular, through the strategic use of Christian education. Now, when I say disciple nations, I mean just that. In the modern church and in the minds of many Christians, discipleship and education are separate activities. This is tragic, since biblically, education is discipleship. Now, historically, the church pioneered education, but much of that ground has been lost. And tragically, with that loss comes the loss of the most powerful tool we have to transform nations. This was not lost on Nelson Mandela, who said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." In the words of Jesus, a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. Here we see that the teacher and master, student and disciple are synonymous terms. In fact, if you review several different Bible translations, you'll see that they're used interchangeably. So education is discipleship. And to this, add the fact that there is currently a convergence of factors on the African continent that are setting the stage for an unprecedented opportunity to disciple an entire generation. Now, these factors include explosive population growth, an insufficient current educational infrastructure, a wave of technology that's phenomenal, urbanization, an emerging African middle class, and a fertile environment for foreign direct investment. Let's take a closer look at each of these trends. The world is definitely becoming more African. Statistician Hans Rosling said that as population growth declines in Asia, African population growth is growing to fill the gap. There's an equilibrium that's coming there. Africa is already the youngest continent, with roughly half of its 1.2 billion people under university age. Add to this the UN projection that 1 billion new Africans will be born in the next 30 years. So the question is, who will educate all these young people? And the answer to that question will determine the future of the continent. You see, the current educational infrastructure in Africa is insufficient, both in capacity and in quality. At 33%, Africa has the lowest net enrollment rates in the world, at about half of the global averages. That being said, great strides have been made in this area in the last 2 decades, so we see things happening and there is progress, but there's a long ways to go still. In terms of quality, there's inadequate teacher education, a pervasive emphasis on rote learning, memorization, current models that don't encourage critical thinking skills, and the STEM subjects are neglected. And there's also a big employable skills gap. What I mean by that is graduates are not being equipped with the skills that African employers need. So there's a big gap to fill there in terms of infrastructure. So current education need in Africa, considering the global enrollment norms, is between 380 million and 464 million. With the current education capacity of 221 million, there's a huge capacity gap. This gap will grow will continue to grow because of those high birth rates that we were talking about. And a percentage of this, perhaps 20 to 25% of this, will be educated by private sector education providers. This presents a huge market for kingdom-minded entrepreneurs with a vision to disciple nations. 2 other factors that make this an unprecedented opportunity are the smartphone explosion and urbanization. Africa has the highest compound average growth rate of mobile subscribers in the world. 250 million smartphone users today, expected to be 690 million by 2025. They say Africa is the last continent to move across the digital divide, but they're actually leaping across that divide as they do. And so as the whole world moves towards smart devices, this is undoubtedly going to impact the way that education is done. Educational business models, the way education is delivered, all of these things are going to be affected by this. I imagine people will be able to complete a college education on their smartphone. So this is the wave of the future. So last mile solutions are improving, but urbanization also plays into this. So I guess you should see it this way, that 2 things are happening simultaneously. Last mile solutions are getting broadband out into more remote areas, but as people move into urban areas, they're coming into places where there's increased broadband access already. So these are big technological factors that are influencing the timeliness of the strategy. There's also economic realities in Africa that are changing. There's phenomenal GDP growth and an emerging middle class. And so what that equals is more educational consumers than ever. Education is one of the first things that a new middle class spend their money on, and it's one of the last things that they're willing to forego during hard times. And so I've seen this time and again when my African friends will make sacrifices for their children's education that others, Westerners, for example, wouldn't consider. And so there's this willingness to sacrifice, to spend, to educate the next generation. And so this bodes well for investment in a sector that I would call resistant to recession. Now, these realities are not lost on investors the world over. The last 15 to 20 years, there's been a huge increase in foreign direct investment in the African education sector. According to private equity reports, internal rates of return for this sector are high, around 30%. So lamentably, much of the world is seeing this and beginning to mobilize and move, but the Western church has been slow to see and respond to this opportunity. And much of the current investment that we see happening in education in Africa is coming from the Middle East and from Asian investors who have a worldview that's contrary to the gospel. And so this is something that's of concern. So help me beat this drum and sound this trumpet and get this message out. So where does that leave us? First, I hope you see the need, and as I said, you begin to champion this yourself, to trumpet this opportunity everywhere you have influence. But we also need to mobilize our kingdom business people, our churches, our mission agencies, and other organizations to move on this opportunity now. There's a window here, and I don't want to see us miss that. Nevertheless, I think that we need to approach this differently than we have many times in the past. The way Christians typically respond to this kind of thing is by passing the hat, taking up an offering, and doing some kind of small-scale effort, a little school somewhere in a village, an orphan school, something like that. And while that's admirable, it just won't cut it. The sheer scale of this need that we're describing, the hundreds of millions that need education, indicate that we must use both donor and market-based approaches. Because to reach the scale that's required, there's going to have to be ways to do something bigger than what we can accomplish by passing the hat. And so we need to educate hundreds of millions, not tens of thousands. At this stage, kingdom investors can still cherry pick the best opportunities that exist. These opportunities that exist in the intersection of discipleship, influence, and profitability. And so this is a phenomenal time for investors to jump in. And I believe as they begin to pave the way and pioneer, it's going to open up other ancillary opportunities as well. So that's I think one of the first things that we need to move on. However, these premium and for-profit models are not going to satisfy the largest part of the need. It'll satisfy 100, 150 million of the need, but there's still a much larger portion of people that won't be educated through that approach. So what's the best way to address this massive need of lower margin education? Well, this is where Vishal Mangalwadi's proposal of large-scale church-based education comes in. The church must recapture her educational mandate. The Great Commission tells us to disciple all nations, teaching them to observe all I've commanded you. So this approach, paired with microfinance to make it possible, has the potential of meeting the need. If done correctly, it would win and disciple hundreds of millions while being financially sustainable and bringing tremendous transformational influence to bear on society. So I hope I've convinced you of this tremendous opportunity. And one way to get the word out is to buy this new book, The Third Education Revolution, and make sure it gets into the hands of as many people as you can. Thanks so much. Blessings now.